loud. All right, there were just a few things that I wanted to talk about um, today. So I don't know that this will take the whole time. The famous last words of a professor, but as as the class goes the entire time. But let me share my screen here. Um, so I guess, I saw a bunch. I tried to follow at a distance, and I know that you just had your UNSDG meeting. So without like kind of reliving everything you talked about in the prior one, I was wondering if there were any things that you wanted to bring up here that you thought were any, interesting or relevant to this group. I'm just curious myself, to be honest with you.
Um, it was great. It was really fun. We got to present on the last day of the UNSDG working group. Um, we learned a new metric that chaos needs, which is the souls saved metric.
What is it?
Souls saved.
So soul, like like souls, like in my soul.
Like, yeah, like, people. Somebody told a great story. We had a great facilitator at the very end, Kendall Fortney from the University of Vermont, OSPO.
Okay.
And people went around the room. He started talking about how open source has led to service and like when in your life you open source like became you became aware of open source and how it led you into the more of a service mindset. And people just told these beautiful stories about like when they sort of had this transition from a place of not service maybe or different to really meaningful. And yeah, one of the metrics was somebody worked in the digital services core about um, on a suicide hotline,
Hmm.
and that was like the real metric for standing up this website or tool or capability. I don't remember exactly what it was, but the metric was souls saved. That they could actually measure that. It's like, wow. So from then on, every job interview he went to, he's like, okay, what meaningful work are you doing? And if it's about return on investment and money, then he was out. He's like,
It
wanted to
just
do
kind of
more
fell
meaning.
flat. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So that was cool. So many connections and stuff. I think I'm excited because the UN is all in on open source, and
Yep.
they have a group called the Open Source United, which is I didn't know much about the UN really before this, but there's like 50 different UN organizations like the World Bank and WHO and UNICEF and all these different groups, and they're all uniting kind of I think from an inner source perspective
Hmm.
to really start sharing because they have some processes that prevent them from sharing publicly, even though the UN open source principles, the very first one is public by default. They have trouble doing that themselves. Talking the talk and not quite walking the walk yet, but that's fine. That's fine. They're trying. So they want us to brief their open source united group, which spans all 50
Oh, that's
organizations
cool.
across the UN,
Okay.
and all of their open source focus. So yeah, that's
Who,
that's exciting.
who do they want to do that? Like some of you folks from the
They
UN.
want our working group, the
Yeah.
UNSDG Chaos Working Group, to do a presentation about what we've done.
Okay.
Remy, during that, there was a hackathon Monday and Tuesday, and Remy and I both kind of didn't do the hackathon, but Remy and his colleague Sachin decided on Tuesday. I was at the Curious Side event, but they decided to spend like half of the day and created this form
I saw that.
that people could use. So it was pretty awesome. We were able to demo that on Friday, and it's just a
Okay.
really good, tangible start to help maintainers and projects sort of raise their hand and identify that they're with the UN SDGs.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Uh, that's very cool. Did you get a sense of at the event, like other university ospos? Like how's that landscape looking?
I'll let Claire talk to that one.
Yeah, sorry, I was just pulling up some other links. So I think the what we did find were other universities who were engaged in open source enablement across the world. And I think, certainly communities that we wouldn't have had a direct engagement with are just our communities don't overlap. So not to mind the announcement around the new UNDP OSPO or sponsored OSPO that's happening in Trinidad and Tobago, but certainly in the continent of Africa. We
Yep.
also met folks from Australia and other places in Asia that again wouldn't have had any maybe as much knowledge of wouldn't have an overlap with our community. So it was great to meet folks that were involved in those practices there.
Do
Um,
you get a
or
sense?
even discuss it with places where there are already like activities happening, but they don't think of it in the context of an OSPO or something. It might be just in the context of open science. So we met some other organizations that work with universities in the context of open science, open research. I was discussing with Software Heritage about that, about who in their community, for example, are participating in that in France. And there's a lot more activity happening, a lot more resources that are available. So just to note that um, organizations like Software Heritage, who have open science supporting documentation and references and assets, they've taken the time to translate those into English, but they feel that they haven't been, aren't as perhaps as discoverable as they might be, or at least that we should all raise awareness about the fact that these are resources also available. So
Okay.
just for me, that was eye-opening as well.
Are you getting a sense? Okay, so this is like a larger question. Are you getting a sense that it's getting noisier, this space? I'm just,
Yes, but I think it's a reflection of the acknowledgement that more intentional effort needs to happen in a different type of domain. So for me, this is noisier in a space that is not developer space. It's noisier about open source in the context of people who are either in policy development and regulation and compliance and in these sorts of things that are at this other level. And for, personally, I see that as an absolutely good thing.
okay. No, yeah, I meant, I didn't mean that as a bad
Oh,
thing.
noisy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's like,
Okay.
yeah. So more noise, but in positive, how do we do this and isn't it a good thing and an acknowledgement of that sort of thing. So but also the challenges. So I would say not just in terms of isn't it a good thing, but a kind of acknowledgement, not a kind of a surface level open source is all a good thing. Also, the kind of thing of here's where it's challenging to do open source, like what David talked about in terms of despite having an open UN principle of open by default, there's a kind of a also discussions happening about we may all agree that, but practically speaking, when you organizationally try to implement this, here's the issue. You have, you know, reams of forms to fill out in order to be able to have something made open. So I think that the discussion about the gap between what we all acknowledge to be good intent and then the institutional barriers that sometimes are in place for historical reasons, those kinds of conversations are also happening, I think.
Okay. So do you have a sense? These are big questions, but do you have a sense that this is going to be like coordinated somewhere? So like when I look at how the corporate hospos kind of became coordinated, a lot of that work seemed to me to kind of coalesce around the Linux Foundation and paid or paying organizations who kind of had the same problems that they were trying to solve. And the LF is right notorious for helping professional open source, right? Kind of that. But then the formation of the to-do group created that central place where people could talk. You're familiar with this group, of course. So like, do you feel like there's a place where this is landing, or is it staying broad? And the reason that I ask that is because if there is a place where this is landing, like maybe we should, like be kind of go in that direction, whatever that direction might be. And maybe this question makes no sense, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Maybe Patrick would like to come in on
Yeah,
that.
Patrick, I'm also kind of looking at you as part of the Apereo Foundation.
Oh well, I was my mic on. Okay. I mean, obviously, I was at OW2 in Paris last week, but we did have um, two people from Apereo, and then another three that are on the board. Angela, Stephanie, and Daniel
Mm-hmm.
were there as well. We talked. We just had our board meeting. It came up a little bit. I guess my sense was, and again, I wasn't there, but hearing the report back was that there seemed to be a disconnect between open source communities of practice and the way they engage and the UN's expectation as a policy and uh, development and management organization that they're so did folks see the Eclipse letter from Congress asking Eclipse to present in front of the Chinese Security Committee or something like that? I don't know what it's called. Some if you'd like a good laugh, you can pull it up. But I think it's this sort of, and not bureaucracy in a negative sense from the UN, but the sense was that there's a process for that organizations like the UN go through that may not align with, not necessarily conflict with, but may not align with um, uh, open source communities and the way they behave, and sort of, is there an understanding between self-organized and self-organizing groups that open source communities tend to be versus something the UN might be more familiar with? And and again, I don't know if I might ask whether or not the to-do group does orchestration and management or just facilitates collaboration,
It's
for good
really,
or bad.
I would look at it as the latter. It's
Yeah,
kind
so I don't.
facilitating people to come together and talk about like overlapping areas of interest and pressing concerns.
Right. So I mean, yeah, I guess that's just my sense. I don't know what the um, was it said what the goal is for the. I mean, if it's to get folks together, is it to for the UN Open Source Week? I mean, is it? Um,
I don't know. I think it's really just conversation. My concerns really stem from like if we have so many conversations in so many different places, we can end this. This is we don't need to, but like if we have so many different conversations, it's hard to share things between us. And if we're not centralizing in a way that like public sector OSPOs, university OSPOs, as Claire had kind of said, like I don't think you used the word OSPO, Claire, but like open source aware groups, that help facilitate the thoughts of open source. I'm just concerned that we're just gonna we're gonna talk a lot, and it's gonna be hard to overlap efforts. I don't know.
Well,
And curious, I think, is a good place to not is to help kind of bring that together. But yeah, Claire.
yeah, I mean, I have a viewpoint to this too. I would acknowledge the fact that there is a diversity of different types of groups. I actually think that's a good thing. I don't think there is any one group that can cover everything that needs to be covered. My observation is that open source is maturing. It is moving beyond the realm of developers into the realm of public sector impact, businesses, corporations, legal, regulation, compliance. There's so much that it is now having the community, the ecosystem now has to address that is so much more than perhaps was ever within the consciousness of an individual contributor, say 10 years ago, the average maybe individual contributor. And I do think that what I'm observing is, and certainly one of the reasons why we looked at Curious is because the context and different contexts means that there are different challenges, different things to be created. There are some common things. And it's wonderful that, for example, things like metrics and measurement and stuff like that CHAOSS is looking at. So there are some horizontal efforts. There's some vertical efforts. There are some regional efforts. There are some industry efforts. There's some, like, there's all sorts of different, there's domain efforts. And for me, I think that is a consequence of the maturing of the whole effort around open source. And I think it's to be welcomed. And I think it's the onus is on us not to centralize that and thereby um, make it too vanilla and come down to common denominators, which I think takes away from the conversation, but to ensure that there are places where we all find out about efforts that are helping elsewhere and look for those collaboration opportunities. Because if we can't all collaborate together, then what hope have we to encourage other people to do that through open source? Because so for me, this isn't about having to consume and coalesce in a formal way. It's about how do we all collaborate. And I think, you know, here we all are. Look at us. We're representing different types of
Yeah.
organizations and different and we're doing it. So that's for me. You don't have to be part of one foundation or one group
Sure.
to do that.
Listening to you talk, Claire, one of the things that kind of came to my mind was years ago, Jim Zemlin had done a presentation on kind of the structure of the Linux Foundation. And again, I'm not pushing for a single foundation to host this, but basically the structure, it was basically a network of innovation. So he said, you know, we're a large network of different people. And they had a bunch of projects that represented, say, horizontals on this grid. And they were, I don't know if a lot of you are technologists, but there's this like OSI model that basically says we have applications at the top and hardware at the bottom and a whole bunch of stuff in between. And so there are certain open source projects that focus on kind of the lower level of technology things. And then there's another set of open source projects that focus on, say, middleware technologies. And there's another set of open source projects that focus on application layer technologies. You know, you kind of had these layers that went down horizontal, and they all focus, and they don't necessarily communicate with one another. They're addressing their own particular challenges. And then he also said that we have verticals that run across all of these projects. And those verticals are things like legal, for example. And the Linux Foundation supports these verticals because every open source project is at some point going to have to deal with legal issues. And so that is something that we at the LF support. Another vertical would be like, say, training. So, you know, like how to welcome newcomers or how to do training within your own open source project. And so they had another vertical that was training. They had another one that I think was just like operations, you know, like how do you actually set up a code of conduct? How do you? And so it was this network of innovation where they have a series of horizontals for a series of projects, and then a series of verticals that support those projects that cut across. So listening to you talk, Claire, that reminded me a lot of that. So the difference is for me is that structure sits at the LF. And I think the structure that we have currently with university open source program offices or public sector open source program offices is we don't have necessarily somebody who looks at that structure overall. And maybe that's okay. I'm hearing you kind of say that that's fine, that we can just let it go and that's all right.
I would propose that perhaps the business model of the Linux Foundation allows for that model, which
totally
and the business model takes a lot of money from their participants who happen to be large
100%.
global corporates who have big wadges of cash to give to support that particular model. And in
100%.
the scenario where there isn't big wadges of cash or a facility to ingest big wadges of cash, and in a cash-strapped ecosystem, perhaps that we're experiencing in other areas, then perhaps you do look for alternative ways to facilitate similar value, but in a different way.
Very, very fair. Well, thank you for that. That was good. Anybody have any other comments on this? This has kind of been running through my mind with Open Source Week. Like as we bring a lot of different groups together, like how do we kind of ensure that we stay like a network a little bit, and even though we don't have the wads of cash, so we don't go all over the place, because we have a lot of things to share. Um, and it seems like Open Source Week is a great way to kind of restitch everybody together, which is pretty cool. All right. Was there anything else that, Patrick, do you have any comments? Or...
Yeah, I mean, I put in the comments. I guess I would advocate for exposing your organization and making it discoverable rather than centralizing. I think a key element is sort of self-organizing groups, self-organizing activities, self-organizing interests. So I can join any group that I think is relevant. I can take on any role in that group that I think is relevant. And it doesn't, so making yourself and the work that you're doing discoverable, I think. So maybe if it's defined, like, like an API, right? You just, you expose yourself to, and then people can hook into whatever they think is. So I'd be interested in organizations that work like, or a network community that work like that. And then I do think that there's an interesting, at OWT I did a presentation on this, and it's this sort of next wave. I don't know what I used two examples: the 2007 Gartner hype cycle of open source and a 2024 Gartner hype cycle of open source. And if you look at the 2007, it's all about it's all about platforms and software, and so it's about tools. In higher ed, it'd be learning management systems and e-portfolios and ERP systems and quiz and lecture capture and all those things. And it's about building these things, and the priorities are making them feature rich and comparable to proprietary options, and support services for countering the FUD 1.0 of who you're going to call and how good can it be if it's free. And that was sort of the thing. And so this is along the lines of maturity. There's a group of folks that have been, and organizations that have been working in that space for a long time, building those tools, advocating for open source as a better development model, as a community practices that enhance engagement and participation and contribution and co-creation. But it's all around that software, creating these stable, viable options. And I think today, if you look at the Gartner hype cycle for open source, it's all about those things, Matt, you mentioned before. It's about governance. It's about licensing upstream, not licensing like the GPL or the Apache or license, but managing licenses, upstream, downstream licensing. It's about IP management. It's about events and community. It's about funding and sustainability. It's about those sorts of things. And I think that where those touch organizations now aren't on the development side. It's not where, okay, we got to get developers together and engineers together and show them a better development model through open source and community. And so while that group is mature, I think, or with experience, the folks that I think that are coming in now who are bumping into open source as an open science, whether they're researchers who look, I'm a geologist, I'm an oceanographer, I know I got to do this open source stuff now, but how does it work, right? So they might not have the practical experience over time, but there's also the policy folks. So now I'm an attorney within the university, and I'm worried about IP. I'm a PI who has, well, really, I'm going to give the direction of this open source software, the build, the roadmap for this to a community of practitioners that I don't control. How am I going to ensure that the software does what I need it for my research? And it's all these policy things. So it's around policy and practice and principles now. And for those folks, I don't think that they have that same background, and therefore their point in maturity is probably on the newer side. And so I guess there's this, and that's what I'm sensing. At OW2, we had the EU and the European Commission come in, and they ostensibly were there actually to tell us that they were setting up a system for American researchers who were being denied federal funding now. They could now come to the EU and they would provide that funding for them. So if the current
Could you drop
administra-
that link in here, please, Patrick?
I'm sorry,
Could you
drop that link.
link in here?
They're just starting this program and they're getting feedback for it. It was about, oh, if you've been denied funding from the NSF or I don't know, NIH or wherever, and you had a grant, they're giving visas. It's not in place now, but I think they want to give visas to researchers to come now hook up with the EU university, and they'll give them that money. I don't know, but that's why they're there. But even for them, and I think this is true in the letter that Eclipse got from the U.S. Congress, these policies people are starting to run into open source, and they're not to be rude, but I don't think they have the maturity yet. If you read that letter from Eclipse, clearly they have no idea how open source works. So I guess that's the disparity I see between the two groups, and therefore that's causing some, maybe not conflict, but we're not speaking the same language yet. Those are my two thoughts.
Those are great. I really like the point of discoverability. I love that in terms of a network. And I do like your point of kind of different groups are residing in the same space that may be at very different states of maturity. We're trying to occupy kind of the same room. Yeah, Stephanie.
I just Patrick, you mentioned that letter a couple times in the last meeting we were in together too. I didn't see it, and I didn't realize it was that China Economic Committee, which is always like a very funny committee that I've followed my entire career. So yeah, I think that's also a whole different. That isn't even just Congress. That's just the policy hawks. I think that they can do. So I think that's even like a whole different discussion of how open source and the politics doesn't quite understand. A lot of open source folks just don't quite understand how the politics work in Congress. And I think that I haven't looked at the letter, so I don't know what they were asking. But did you post that somewhere and I should have seen it? Because I thought it was did we have it in like the Apereo Slack or something? There, okay.
No, it just Daniel brought it up, and I think he put a link to. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah,
Whoever's
thanks.
speedy like that.
Yeah.
And that's a great point, Stephanie, because I will admit it's a two-way street maturity. Maybe I don't have an appreciate for the policy side. So I just think, well, of course, everything should be open.
Oh, this is this is a whole other group. Oh my God, these guys are crazy. Okay, yeah, sorry. I'm just like, oh, this is a whole other group. I was like, about the Economic Commission. They're normally. I'll look at I'll look over this and with flip my hats around. But a lot of this has to do. I mean, almost 100% has to do with the fact that they're trying to get Huawei like kicked out of any and all things. So yeah. So I mean, it's not even about open source to them. It's just about you working with Huawei. That is bad. So
yeah, and there's no Linux servers running in insert your current government of whatever that you don't want to work with. It's just
exactly. So. Thanks for the link.
All right. Thank you. This is really helpful to me. I really appreciate the conversation. Just as in terms of thinking about all the people that are kind of occupying this space, and it does seem to be evolving quickly. And it's just great, I think, to continue to think about it as it unfolds in front of us. All right. I wanted to give you a quick update on the practitioner guide that we have talked about in prior meetings. So I went kind of back through our notes and everything that we had. And the guide here, at least the first guide that I'm working on, is research software impact for researchers. Maybe too many research words in the title, but how researchers would demonstrate the impact of their software. All right, so this is not about, Stephanie, at least you had talked about like the impact of an OSPO. I don't think that's what this one is quite yet. But that is certainly another guide that we could think about. So note on that. So I've been trying to set the scope on this and using things that we have talked about in the past in terms of why this guide might be useful. What I'd like to say is the four metrics that I would like to propose that we could at least start talking around are these four. So software citations, new contributors, release frequency, and commits. And so the idea here is that this would be a guide that could be provided to research scientists at a university by saying we recommend that you start tracking these four particular metrics as a way to demonstrate impact. As Angela had pointed out, it would also be nice to at least have the OSPOs be able to provide this guide for, say, review panels by saying here are four metrics that are useful for understanding impact, so that we could have the software developers who are or the software maintainers who are tracking these metrics, and the tenure and review committees also looking at the same metrics. It would be nice if those two kind of lined up. You know what I mean? That you don't have researchers kind of tracking one set of metrics and review committees tracking another set of metrics. So I'd like to put these four out, and I'll talk about how we could understand these four in a little bit. But Claire, I see your hand up, so go ahead. You're muted, Claire.
Two questions. I suppose the first one is that alongside these ones, the other one that I had heard discussed, but
Yeah.
you know, again, it would have been the adoption, like the downloads, the folks using it. And I think that in many respects, in all our discussions, that one, it speaks to the citations or use of, rather than the contribution back, and it sometimes can be more determinant of what we have heard is perceived impact.
Sure.
And the second is a question, and I'm conscious that that in some of the other maturity guides that I've seen, there have been kind of almost like that maybe they're not metrics. So this was more of a question as to whether or not there's an equivalent. I've seen the kind of idea of having it, having, say, for example, a contribution.md and a license on your project
Sure.
as being the very basic, do not pass go until you do these very
Yep.
basic steps. And I didn't know if that is the kind of the point at which you would start here, or if you would if this is more an assumed that you assume you go beyond that very basic enablement kind of checkbox type metrics before you actually go to checking level of impact, I guess.
I was past that, but I had assumed that.
Yeah, no, but maybe then we need to put some assumptions in as well to
Yeah,
understand
that's
the
fair.
assumed goals. Yeah.
Yep. And so like there is, have you seen the to-do group linter? Do you know that one?
The which one?
There's a to-do group linter. And so basically it's a tool that you can actually point at a repository to make sure it has those things that you just mentioned. So it's an actually automated tool that you can just kind of ensure. So like it would be assuming you pass this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then look at these metrics like that. Is that what you're saying? Yep. Okay. I don't have a link for it, but it's a pretty basic linter, and it looks for like a code of conduct, contributing file, readme. Maybe there's one other. Oh, a license file, a license.md file. Like, just do you have the basics in there to at least be a project?
And in the academic context, back as a precursor to your metric in there, the ability to cite your software, right? Like some sort of identifier.
Oh yeah. Actually, that doesn't look for it. So like a DOI or something like that.
However you want to.
Yeah.
That you have stated how to cite your software, your preferred method.
That's good. Okay, great. So any other comments right now on this? I'll talk a little bit about these. Yeah, David.
I agree with everything Claire said. I don't even the new contributors, release frequency, and code changes commits feel very corporate to me. They don't. I mean, that feels like I don't care necessarily.
Okay.
If if a researcher is great at building a community around their project, like that is an interesting metric, and maybe it'd be nice to value, but care more about,
The software itself.
they building a usable product that people like and are using.
This, in that case, yeah, I totally fair. In that case, this one still might stick because this is kind of it's an indicator of like attending to upstream dependencies that may have vulnerability problems, that you're still being attentive to the software. So that's usually what the frequency or the cadence is about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying they're not valuable. The health of a project is important, but from evaluating the researchers, I think the things like how many people are using it, maybe even GitHub stars, though that's kind of a popularity contest. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and like all of these, oops. We also have things like forks, which is like non-development forks. That can be a tricky one sometimes because it could just be forked and then the fork can just kind of die. But having your project forked to create a new project can also be a nice indicator of impact. Okay. Let me hear me out. Let me hear me out on release frequency. I do think there's value in that one. But I understand your point that it's really more about the software itself. My argument with release frequency is if you're not attending to kind of the basics on software, then I think it's possible that your impact can go down if you're creating poor software. And so cadences can just be kind of an indicator of that sometimes. Any of these, so and I can take a look at these. I can at least start on a couple of them. What the way that these work is under how to take action is we would say, let's stick with stars, for example. We would say, here's a metric around stars, or here's a metric around downloads. Here's what this metric could look like in terms of a table or a graph, just quite simply. But here, more importantly, it's a narrative that follows that image that says, here's how you go about interpreting this metric in context. So simply looking at the number of downloads is by itself probably not a perfect metric, but it'll at least help you create an argument around how people are using your software. So a lot of this how to take action is less about the actual numbers, say, for example, of downloads, but how you might, as a researcher, go about articulating why the number of downloads is a strong representation of impact. Does that make sense? Putting them in context is what they're doing, and they're not ever going to be perfect. And so what I'd like to propose is that I can stick with these and software citations, but kind of start talking about how, when you see this information, how you narrate around it and take action on it. Does that seem all right with folks?
I just want to, I feel like I was just in a meeting and I think it might have been Dawn's session. It's such a blur. I've been in so many meetings over the last 2 weeks. I can't remember who said what anymore. I need to take notes, but I feel like we were actually having this specific discussion, and it might have been the one about funding and impact. That stars was, they were explicitly talking about stars as maybe not being a strong one to use because it could just be like an indication of some like a blip type of thing, like, oh, there was some big event and it was highlighted and people looked at it, but then it doesn't actually indicate use. So I would actually lean towards, well, software citation I think is important for what the scope of for the research software, but also and not necessarily new contributors, but variation of contributors, which I know is hard to gauge with the current tools we have. But and then I do think that I agree. I think downloads might make for our the Arbor Business White might make the most sense for ones to look at. So, and like I said, I feel bad. I don't remember who I'm quoting here.
Okay.
So it could be anybody from that panel.
We're all kind of when you think impact.
Ask Dawn. Ask Dawn. Just kidding.
I can.
I'll ask her when I see her. I'm thinking about impact. The idea of stars just kind of like seems a little bit less.
There has been Georg and Sophia Vargas, who you know, Stephanie.
Yeah, those of you.
They wrote a paper on how they think stars can actually be a proxy for downloads.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I kind of forget how they did it, but I'll track that down.
Okay.
Like they think there's some relationship there.
Yeah. And I could be just totally misquoting. Like I said, I'm just the whole like I have to go back and like write up my notes at some point and try to figure out who said what on different things. So but just remembered as we were talking about it, I just remember like, oh, I remember this conversation from yesterday. I don't remember exactly who said what though. But I do think that I do agree that downloads I think for the research software perspective would be a particularly useful one.
Okay. It did make me think to kind of to David's comment and listening to you talk, Stephanie. Like, David, do you think where you are at your university, like things like variety of contributors within a project is not a good indicator of having an impact? So like if we have like a project that has a number of different universities contributing or corporations contributing as a proxy.
Yeah, I mean, I get, how do you, some projects are meant to, like, it's exciting if they're broad and they're trying to build a community then yeah, they should get credit if that's what they're trying to do. And some are a tiny little community, but they're super powerful for that small community. I'm not sure, but maybe it's a percentage of the community. You kind of know this is, astrophysics, and this is the size of that community, and
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe it's something that I should write in here, like, oops, not all metrics for all projects kind of thing. Yeah, Claire.
Yeah, this is where the goal of the project becomes incredibly important. So I remember a conversation where people were saying, if you could demonstrate that there was contributions to a particular project from a wide diversity of university participants and corporate contributors, then you could show that, and for example, that being a project that maybe had generated investment in the R&D project from, a group of people, like that there was a particular type of project where the impact of that project could be measured by the diversity of the contributions, for example. But it's a very particular type of project. And this is where we're getting into, you have to be really explicit about the goals, that this guide would be for a particular type of set of goals.
Right. So like if we're saying this is I get what you're saying. If this is meant to be, if your project is a library that's just meant to be used, a very small library that does one small computational thing, I'm not really looking at building community around it, but it may have huge downstream impact.
Or you're in arts and humanities, and the piece of software becomes the seminal piece of software that all research in that domain gets done on, but none of your users ever contribute back. That's still fine.
So is the path here to, in your mind, to like write a series of guides that are specific to types of projects, or is it to put a caveat in something like this that says, listen, based on the type of project, you're going to have to kind of play around with these metrics in ways that are meaningful to you?
I think it relates back to the goals of the project being made open source. So as we've said before, there are goals related to, I want this project just to be open source as a artifact that demonstrates my commitment to open science and therefore makes this particular piece of research reproducible. That's a particular goal. Or there's a goal of I want to be foundational software for a domain. That's another particular goal. Or I want this to be, you know, an influential piece of software in a kind of a commercial tech ecosystem or something like that. They'd all be completely separate goals and different impact measures would be applied. Sorry, yeah, 2 cents.
Okay, yeah, fair. Yeah, David.
I think a huge value of this could be directing it at the promotion and tenure policy and boards, selection committees, and so that you can justify the value of all these open source contributions, you know, in the terms that maybe they could understand. So you can bridge that understanding, you know, where they're used to just prestigious, you know, journal publications. You can say, no, this is prestigious, this is impactful, you know, give them credit. Make that case.
And I have that in here as one of the audience, like part of the audience chain. So then to Claire's point, like, is it a single guide that says projects come in a variety of shapes and sizes with different goals? And here's a series of metrics that can be used across those projects and goal sets? Or is it like a guide 1A, which is like, for this type of goal, here are the metrics to take a look at. For this type of goal, here are the metrics to take a look at. And for this type of goal, so there would actually be 3 different guides. I saw you nodding. Yes, Claire.
Personally, I think you start with the one that you know like that this would be closest to, and you say this is a guide for this particular goal. This is back to the same point I was kind of thinking about before. We're just getting too nuanced. You can't make one guide for all scenarios anymore. It'll be too hard. So I would start with this is a guide for researchers, software impact for researchers who are trying to do whatever this context is, and then just do that.
Okay. Okay. Can you also think about that too, kind of before our next meeting? Because I understand what you're saying. Like, you don't want to have one guide that is like across the entire board, but at the same time, I don't want to have like 45 guides that are like,
we don't have enough information to make 45 guides. We have 3 scenarios we talked about today, you know. So I know, but I hear you, but it is, I guess it's too big of a my observation is that it's too hard in certain circumstances. So
I get your point. Fair point. Okay, cool. All right. Well, every time we're on a path, we'll get there slowly but surely. All right. Well, folks, we are at the end of time. I appreciate the feedback. Who put this on here? Has anybody seen this? Did you put that on there, Claire?
this
Yeah. One.
Yeah, I put that one on there. That's just come out 2 days ago, and I just spotted it today. And well, first of all, it was like, whoa, I hadn't even seen the executive order, but I will say that the agency guideline talks about metrics and measurement and evaluation of these tenets. And I suppose it just made me kind of go, ooh, that some of these are very explicitly referencing open source software. And if you scroll all the way down to the things that have to be implemented in 60 days, there, within 60 days, it's development of standardized metrics and evaluation mechanisms to assess adherence to the tenets. And I'm thinking, whoo, maybe we should suggest some. That was why I put it in.
Okay. I had not seen this either when I saw you drop this in, or somebody dropped this in. It was kind of eye-opening. So this is on my read list today. That's for sure.
Do all this work in 60 days with no money because we cut it all. That's ridiculous.
Get to it.
Open source.
I was going to suggest, you know, like, and in the descriptions, how about the agency addressing it, and we can like tell them to join the CHAOSS working group to figure out and write a guide about it, something like that.
Here to that. All right. Well, thanks for sharing this, Claire. I had not seen this at all. I appreciate it. All right. Till next time, folks, have a good remainder of the week and, you know, have a nice summer as it goes on right now for many of you. So, yeah,
Bye.
Claire, you're muted.
Yeah,
Did you have
just does chaos take a break or does it keep going for
No,
those?
we'll take a break in August.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so typically we're off like 3 weeks in August or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, just because everybody's gone and the school year starts. It's such a funny time of the year. So Elizabeth will announce that.
Well, thank you.
Okay,
See
take
you later.
care. Thanks so much.